If you're shopping for a boat, you may be given a choice, and it's a pretty big one: outboards or inboard outboards. This video will go over each type of boat engine, their advantages, disadvantages, use cases, and our ultimate recommendation. Starting with outboards, they are perhaps the most easily identifiable piece of machinery on a boat. They're mounted to the transom of a boat and can vastly range in scale, from 2.5 horsepower hand-controlled tillers to massive 600 plus horsepower outboards with boating's most advanced tech. As the name suggests, they sit on the outside of the boat and are clearly visible. They're available on virtually all recreational boats, including pontoons, bass boats, deck boats, bow riders, and center consoles. Moving on to the pros, outboards are designed specifically for boating, and this comes with a slew of advantages. Firstly, outboards are much more space efficient and compact. This gives you and your crew much more room and storage space. Outboard engines are light and powerful. Their compact design requires less componentry and equipment than their IO counterparts, which in turn allows for better performance at the same horsepower level. A massive advantage to outboards is their ease to work on. There are a few key reasons as to why, including accessibility. Outboards are typically mounted on the transom of the boat, making them easily accessible from the rear. This accessibility simplifies maintenance tasks such as checking the oil, changing spark plugs, or accessing the cooling system. Portability. Outboards are self-contained units, which means that they can be removed from the boat for service or repairs. The portability of smaller outboards makes it convenient to take the engine to a workshop if needed, reducing downtime on the water. And repowering is much easier for outboards as well. User-friendly design. Outboard engines often have fewer systems interconnected, like exhaust or cooling systems, which reduces the chance of complex issues. They're also less prone to corrosive problems as they're lifted out of the water when not in use. Accessibility of parts. Due to their popularity, outboard engines usually have readily available replacement parts and a well-established service network. As a result of this and all of these points, service costs are often much cheaper for outboards, and we'll go over as to why IO expenses are higher in just a bit. Although they have a superior power to weight ratio, outboards just don't have enough torque for larger vessels, so the workaround is to add another outboard or two or three to get the required power. This can, of course, be costly. Older outboard models are especially louder and less fuel efficient than newer models. This is an issue specific to older models, however, because new models are much more quiet and much more fuel efficient. Of course, the outboard package is visible. Some boaters may prefer to have their engine compartment completely out of sight. Additionally, outboards take up a significant amount of space on your swim platform. Inboard outboards, aka IOs or stern drives, on the other hand, rest inside of the boat in a dedicated engine compartment. IO engines use a marine-adapted automotive engine style. This engine operates a mechanism that looks and operates similar to the lower unit of an outboard. Most IOs range from 10 horsepower on the ultra-low end to some sailing over 1,000 horsepower for some commercial engines. You're mostly going to see IOs on bow riders and mid to large cruisers. It's incredibly rare to see them on anything other than that. Some pontoon manufacturers have experimented with IOs in the past in an effort to create some unique clean transom layouts, but seeing a new IO on a pontoon is almost as rare as seeing a unicorn in your backyard. IOs have greater bottom end torque and good maneuverability on the water. Turning feels very responsive and on the dime. This is great for water sports applications, from skiing to wakeboarding and running around on the lake. In recent years, some newer drives come with forward-facing props which pull the boat through the water instead of the traditional push-style outdrives. This, coupled with the engine unit being tucked under the swim platform, allows for even more advanced wake sports. Of course, you're clearing up your back deck space significantly. Again, this is great for water sports, so you've got a clear line of sight of who or what you're pulling. In terms of fuel efficiency and whether or not they're quieter than outboards, it really depends on the engine. There's no definitive answer for this point, but there are many IOs that operate quietly and efficiently. Both modern IOs and outboards are designed for an efficient, relatively quiet ride that are huge improvements from previous renditions. Now on to the cons. The biggest downside of IOs, and when I say biggest, I'm not kidding, is their serviceability and the costs associated with that. This is due to a few reasons. IO engines are located within the hull, making them harder to access. This requires the disassembly of boat parts, adding both complexity and time to the service. The confined space and complex configurations of IO engines can make servicing labor intensive, contributing to, of course, higher costs. Constant exposure to salt water can accelerate corrosion and wear on IO engine components, leading to more frequent maintenance and potential repair costs. Servicing IO engines requires specific marine expertise, which can result in higher service rates from technicians with this specialized knowledge. In contrast, outboard engine knowledge is more readily available and streamlined. And unlike an outboard, a stern drive requires you to cut a giant hole in the transom that sits below the waterline. Bellows are essentially gaskets that prevent water intrusion into the boat, and if they fail, guess what? Your boat sinks. Of course, all of these points equate to higher servicing costs and often more engine issues in the long run. Winterizing inboard outboard engines is an essential maintenance step to protect them during the colder months. However, it comes with a notable disadvantage: the loss of access to your boat during winter. Winterization typically involves draining the engine's cooling system, adding antifreeze, and taking other protective measures to prevent freezing and damage. These precautions effectively render the boat inoperable until it's de-winterized in the spring. To properly winterize most IOs, the boat needs to be taken out of the water and stored for the winter season. This means that you won't have access to your boat during the colder months, and if you decide to run your boat after winterization, you'd have to re-winterize it. The duration of winterization can vary depending on your location and local climate, but it often means several months of downtime. This extended period without access to your boat can be frustrating, of course, especially if you enjoy boating year-round. And if you live in an area with unpredictable weather patterns, you may find yourself unable to use your boat even on unseasonably warm winter days due to the winterization process. Of course, this is all a big inconvenience and yes, another cost. IOs are on the downtrend. At the turn of the century, they used to dominate the market, but if we look at the past 20 years of search trends, IOs have steadily declined in interest, whereas outboards are increasing. Additionally, future forecasts predict this margin widening, with outboards accounting for an increasing portion of recreational boating revenue. This next point is a little bit trickier, and that's about the price of IOs versus outboards. A quick comparison will show you that IOs are cheaper up front than outboards, but it's a little bit more complicated than that. Let's look at Tahoe's 210 model with an outboard and an IO. A base 210S Limited with a standard 225 horsepower outboard engine costs $56,240. The cost per horsepower is around $250. A base 210SI Limited with a standard 250 horsepower Alpha 1 IO costs $56,995 at about $227 per horsepower. So at first glance, it looks like IOs are a better bang for your buck, but an important piece of consideration is that IO horsepower is rated at the crankshaft, while outboard horsepower is rated at the prop. As the power from the crankshaft reaches the prop on an IO, you lose about 15 to 20% of your power. So that 250 horsepower ends up actually being around 200 to 215. Factor in the added weight of IOs and the cost benefits quickly disappear. So head to head, what do we recommend? Pretty easily, we choose outboards. Their reliability, comeuppance, ease of service, relatively low service costs, and compatibility with new technologies is unparalleled. Additionally, they have better mid-range acceleration and higher top speeds. But that's not to say that IOs lose in every aspect, however. IOs are good options for power sports, but poor serviceability and associated costs are big flags that weigh them down. If you've owned an outboard or an IO, what was your experience with them like? We would love to know. And as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.